Former NFL quarterback Colin Kaepernick is producing a new Netflix series called Colin in Black and White, where he analyzes the racial dynamics of modern America. Now, the media piece that I'm going to present to you gives a preview of this ongoing Netflix series, and in this preview, Colin draws an analogy between the modern employment system of the NFL and the literal auctioning and selling and buying of human beings as property. Now, you can judge for yourself whether this is a fair comparison, whether it's measured, appropriate, accurate, or whether it's outlandish. Let's roll the first clip.
The NFL is a league made up of mostly black players, but run by an almost entirely white group of team owners. We talked a lot on this show about how the league has struggled to balance that dynamic, particularly in the face of last year's racial justice protests and reckoning. But it's also hard to ignore some of the images that come to mind when thinking about the way the league functions. Every year, a mostly black group of players are valued based on their physical ability. They're told to run, jump, tackle, all to demonstrate their strength. Then, one by one, they're literally auctioned off to one of the mostly white team owners. I'm not saying that the league is inherently racist, but it does have a power dynamic that intersects with race and is absolutely worthy of scrutiny. Over the weekend, Colin Kaepernick, a man who knows all too well about that dynamic, did just that. The first episode of his new Netflix limited series, Colin in Black and White, makes a comparison that many of us notice, but few of us have ever really said out loud.
Before they put you on the field, teams poke, prod, and examine you, searching for any defect that might affect your performance. No boundary respected, no dignity left intact.
Look at this. Mr. Favre, I got your bid.
Here's the problem I have with the clip we just watched. You can draw an analogy between almost any two things. Here, I'll give you an example. Adolf Hitler drank water. I drink water. Adolf Hitler took an art class in high school. I took an art class in high school. My point is that just because you can make an analogy, that analogy is only a good one if it serves your point precisely enough to basically show that there is a comparison between the two things you were analogizing, right? So when Colin Kaepernick basically claims that the NFL is like, in some manner, the buying and selling and the owning of people as property, he does himself and his cause a disservice, because people who are against him can look at this and dismiss the fact that racial injustice in America is an actual problem. Because, and not only is Colin Kaepernick putting this information out here as an authority figure on the subject matter, the media is here bolstering him as an authority figure on the subject matter. And in my mind, it's wholly ludicrous to compare contractual employment. Forget the fact that NFL players are paid millions of dollars. Contractual consensual employment to the literal buying and selling of people as property. The same objections could be made against, the practice of, being a bodybuilder or being some sort of model. Just because there are things that can be likened to things that happened during slavery does not mean it can be likened to slavery.
Joining me now is Jamel Hill, contributing writer for The Atlantic. Jamel, the clip we just played is the first scene in Colin's limited series. Why do you think he chose to start there? What do you think is the point he's trying to make?
Well, thanks for having me on, as always. I think the point was that he kind of wanted to hit people between the eyes. A lot of people haven't heard from Colin Kaepernick in some time. And this was an opportunity that I think he used rather skillfully to let people inside of not just his childhood, but in many ways, a little bit of his current perspective. And as you said in your open, this is an imagery that we've all noticed. And listen, I just did a panel Friday with Ava DuVernay, with the executive producer, Michael Starberry, and the star of the show, Jaden Michael, who plays young Colin Kaepernick. And Ava DuVernay said it straight out of the gate. It's like, this was not meant to be a direct comparison. Obviously, you have players who are getting paid millions of dollars, but the imagery is very on board. I mean, if you watch the combine, you see what it is. You see primarily black men in these skimpy shorts being tested physically in every manner and direction. And the imagery is very similar. And as Colin made the point in this particular episode, that this is not about calling them slaves, saying that modern NFL players are slaves. It's about the power dynamic being established, that your black body is here for a very specific purpose. And that purpose is to use it as much as possible, to use it up. And whatever happens to you, happens to you. And that's just part of the game.
Here's my problem with this portion of the media piece. My main takeaway is that it has become legitimate in many circles of our society to basically present any conversation about race as valid. Right there, the sports writer who's on MSNBC, Jamel Hill, she basically says, his purpose was to hit people in between the eyes. It's just to let them know his perspective. Well, the problem is his perspective could very well hurt the cause that he wants to promote. Whether you agree or not, it's a fact that racial injustice is a problem in America. It's just a matter of degrees. How can it be solved? Can it be solved through legislation? Is it a mere matter of, individuals having racist, unconscious biases or whatever, which is a long discussion. But that discussion is not served by hyperbole. And then both the anchor and the sports reporter Jamel Hill, they try to give caveats saying, well, it's not a direct comparison. And yes, they're making millions of dollars, but it is a comparison nonetheless. Again, it is a comparison that Hitler drinks water, I drink water. Paul Pot liked women, I like women. You can compare almost any two things, because we live in a world where physical objects are in relation to other physical objects, right? The issue is the comparison warranted? And it's almost worse that the media legitimizes Colin Kaepernick as an authority on the subject than Colin Kaepernick presented himself as authority on the subject. Because I have no problem with Colin Kaepernick doing whatever he wants to do. It's America. I have a problem with the people who basically threw a hissy fit, a tantrum, whatever you want to call it, because Colin Kaepernick decided to kneel for the flag. Who cares, right? It's America. The troops died so you could kneel for the flag. And the troops didn't die so you could, follow some sort of rote programming where you don't have any freedom. Right? So it all boils down to, in my mind, not even necessarily what Kaepernick is producing. It boils down to legitimate media bolstering everything he says because he said it. Again, it's It's the modern phenomena that any discussion about race is valid.
Right. It's the commodification of people and the exploitation of black labor that I think is the through line, not necessarily the technical, whether or not the players are getting paid or whether or not it's a direct comparison, but more so how the black body is being used in the system. Can you talk about the power dynamic more? Because I think that this gets lost in a lot of the conversations about the need for more black ownership and black leadership within the NFL. If there was more diverse leadership within the NFL, that would obviously change the optics right away. But do you also think it would change the substance in terms of how the players are treated within the league?
Yeah, I mean, I think the power dynamic would definitely shift because you'd have more people in the company of other people who look like them, who can understand certain cultural sensitivities, and it would be a difference. But the fact is the NFL has never had a majority black owner. They struggle mightily when it comes to having black coaches. I believe there's, 3 in the league right now. It took a while to get to a point where you even had black quarterbacks on a regular basis starting for NFL teams. That has changed. But even the way black quarterbacks are treated, it's still different than a lot of white quarterbacks are treated as well. And so those power dynamics are established from the very beginning that a player enters the league. They know their place and they do everything possible to send that message. Most glowing example right now is Colin Kaepernick. He is out of the NFL because he chose to speak up about racial injustice and oppression. There is no other reason. By blackballing Colin Kaepernick, the league, the NFL owners wanted to send a very strong point to players that their social sensitivities, their cultural sensitivities, them being outspoken, them being speaking out against racial hierarchies and racial dynamics will not be tolerated in this league. And if you do, it could cost you your career. And that's what we know.
I feel like all reasonable minds can agree that there are some legitimate racial issues with regards to the NFL and its players, right? That's been its history, right? At first it's what we didn't want black people to play, right? Then it was, the black man is not cerebral enough to, be the quarterback. Apparently you got to do some advanced calculus to, read a route, make the correct read and throw the ball, right? There's legitimate issues in the ownership, in the hierarchy, the how many, coaches are of color, right? Those are legitimate issues, at least in my mind. Because if the majority of the labor force and the talent who produce the product are people of color, it begs the question, why aren't they represented all throughout the hierarchy, right? Because it cannot be a case of they're not qualified. Because the number one qualification for football is knowing football. But that issue cannot be conflated with the structure of the NFL, of the fact that you do have owners, of the fact that, there is a draft, or as they refer to it, an auction. Even if you address all of these hierarchical issues, if you agree that they're issues, and have more people of color represented throughout the hierarchy of the organization, the very complaint at the beginning will remain unchanged. And they kind of allude to that in the clip, but they kind of just mention it and then bypass it. So the original complaint levied, is that even really a complaint at all? And I find it that a lot of the times the media speaks for Colin Kaepernick and tries to put a lot of spin on what he said to make it more in line with reasonable ways of thinking. Because if you take the clip, and again, the clip is not in full context. I haven't seen the, full program, but if you take the clip in and of itself, Colin Kaepernick says they strip you of your dignity. They poke and pry as they, examine your black body. And, in the media analysis, they say it's, the fact that they're using and commodifying black bodies. Like, well, that's an issue with capitalism and not an issue with racism, right? So we're conflating issues with capitalism and issues with racism. Everybody who is employed is a commodity, whether you're black or not. So that's not a racial issue. So that's basically my breakdown of this, media piece on something I found just to be completely outlandish, to be honest with you. And again, in conclusion, I want to restate, I have no problem with Colin Kaepernick doing whatever he wants to do. I feel the main issue is the general societal norm that has been developing, where any discussion about race, as long as it's about, bias against people of color, is legitimate. And it's legitimized by, actual authoritative media outlets. And I don't know, you could call me out in the comment section if you want to, I really saw no legitimate point raised by Colin Kaepernick. I saw nothing that would convince anybody who wasn't already convinced of his position. In fact, anybody who is on the fence or against Colin Kaepernick is going to be they're going to be made more stalwart in that position. But that's the end of the review of this clip. If you like the video, please comment, drop a like, starting a new channel, and I'll be doing videos like this on politics and culture. I will see you next time.